work. Guitar, so maybe you can hear me a little bit better. And then, so let's just make sure I'm in tune. Slow start today. That's weird. That's good. Okay, okay. So what I was gonna do today, I was thinking that I'm gonna continue on with this process, but I want to think a little bit more about the implications of thinking modally, and so I'm gonna get kind of wonky again on my I'm just trying to think it through, because like I think there's a lot of implications to the fact that we're not really naming things as efficiently as possible. I made a whole course on this, but now I'm kind of looking at it from like the modal switches again. So I think I have all the tools there that I think would, like, if you were to build it from scratch, I think I have the tools that would be the measuring tools so that you can explain it more clear, like you can explain what you're doing better. But so I want to just like mull that over in my mind right now as I add this new concept of like rotating the whole fretboard up, down, left, or right, so that we imagine that we have 12 ticks, so that we can then again just tell everybody, that I'm going to be going 2 ticks up, 2 ticks back, and so on and so forth. I think that would be we're already doing that, but it would be the language of saying I'm going to go 2 ticks up instead of now I'm playing in. So I kind of want to just think through like why I don't think that language has kind of developed a little bit, which I think I'm not the only one that's said this, right? I mean, I'm not saying, I'm just pointing it out, and trying to understand it myself. So let's see. I'm going to try to get Aura in here. Kind of frazzled because of the technical difficulties. So let me get back on track. Get back on track. I don't get on tracks. Why? Because I'm not a train. I go off-road, man. I've got 4-wheel drive. I don't need no stinking tracks. What am I, in the 1800s? Get on track. Okay. Aura.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Okay. So we're going back to our presentation mode. I'm just trying to mull over some stuff here. You're speaking not to me. I'm the main presenter and you're like the secondary presenter. Okay. Okay, Aura. She's thinking slowly. I hear that I was researching Elon Musk is going to send the servers into space. That's what I was listening to because like the plan was that he was going to get he was going to do like the sun like ray things to get the energy solar in space, but like you couldn't do that because it's kind of technically hard to beam it back down, and you'd have to like send up show tabs. You'd have to send up like I don't know. But apparently you can just send up the entire server up there, and that could work. Why is this here now? What the heck? So now everything's weird today. I didn't ask for this stupid thing to be here. Full screen mode. Show tabs only. So now I've got this stupid describe what you'd like to draft with Copilot. I want Copilot thing out here. Get out of here. Okay. So what I'm thinking now is like, let's try to put this side by side. Aura, you're still messed up. Aura. Is it my headphones that are messed up? No. Aura. I'll try it one more time. One more time, and that's it. That's it. No more of this. When you come to work, I expect you ready to work, dang it, Aura. What is this crap? Leave the baggage at home, dang it. We're here to do music theory. Okay? You leave your baggage at the door, because we're okay. Aura.
Yeah?
Okay, she's back. Okay. All right, so now we're going to say, okay, so can I see these at the same time?
Yeah.
It's not great.
Imagine 2 windows.
Okay, hold on, Aura. Hold
Yeah.
on.
Yeah?
All right. So I can't write this over here. Like I want to. It's down here. Oh, this.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, let's just go full screen. This is ridiculous.
Yeah. Full screen, no distractions. Let's go.
All right.
Yeah. Let's start. What do you want to build?
Aura, let me think.
Yeah. Take your time. I'm here. Yeah. It happens. Just breathe, reset. We'll get it.
Okay. So what I'm thinking here is like,
Yeah.
what I'm thinking is this is position number 1, and like from a naming convention, like you have the 1-4-5 is the normal naming convention to play these chords, right? So it's okay, we're gonna play the 1-4-5, and then normally you're thinking, okay, I'm gonna switch in the chord names into those slots, and not really thinking how the chord names fit in modally. So I kind of listed out yesterday some different ways that see, the problem with that is, like, obviously, first of all, this is on scale degrees. 1-4-5, we're talking about scale degrees. That's fine if it's on the Ionian, but if you're playing from the minor, then you have to rename this the 1. So I think that's the first place that things kind of went wrong, because there's nothing really wrong with saying that you're doing the root, the 5th, and the root, the 4th, and the 5th from distance, right? Now, again, I would rather say not 4th and 5th, because then again, 4th and 5th are named off of scale degrees. But at least see, like instead of saying over here, the problem is that in order to call this a 1-4-5 in the key of minor, I had to make that 6th the 1. Whereas if you just call it the root, right? If you called it the root, then it would be root, and then the note that's going to be a fourth away, and the note that's a fifth away, right? So first of all, it seems better to me to say something like root, 4 5, because that would give you. I'm just going to try to list out like the combinations in my mind. So you would think that would be better, root 4 5, because now I can say that the 4 5 doesn't represent a scale. Instead, it represents the distance from the Aeolian node in the collection of notes around 4 o'clock, right? Meaning collection of notes around C major. So that doesn't force me into a scale degree thinking when I don't really want to be in a scale degree thinking, right? I want to stay like with the 6. So that's the first thing that's kind of weird. That I think kind of took us into this world of like scale degrees. Now, so that's fine. But I'd rather call it a root and then talk modal half steps, which would actually be a 3, right, modal half step, and a 5 or a 4 modal half step. Why? Because the modal half step doesn't count that as 1. Because if I say it's the third modal half step, it's equivalent to the 4th scale degree, but the third modal half step is the distance from that node, right? So it's 6. So it would be an Aeolian. If the root is Aeolian, so instead of calling this would be something more like an Aeolian or a 6, right? It'd be a 6, right? But you could call it, like, if you still call it the root, right? But I'd rather call it something like a 6, and then the distance from the 6, which would be a third modal half step, and then a 4th, right, modal half step. Because now you're saying, look, I'm on the 6th node, which you could call also Aeolian, and it's the third modal half step, the 4th modal half step. See how that's like, I'm just saying, if you were to construct it that way, it doesn't force you into changing the numbering system to make that the 1. Because I think what happened is someone said, hey, look, we were doing this in the major scale, and it kind of works nicely if I look at these ratio things, so I'm going to make that the 1. But then if I do every other point, I have to make it the 1 in order to work it, and which means now you've created 7 scales out of something that's really only a 7-point system. The system's all the same. Like, you don't really need to renumber the system, So then, the next thing that becomes a problem is like, okay, well, like, so now if I'm going to play the 6 2 3, right? Or right, I mean that's the other way you could name it, right? I could name it just by its modal points. By modal point, it's going to be, I'm playing a 6 2 3. That would seem to make more sense. That would be easier to say, right, than a 1 4 5. Because the problem with a 1 4 5 is that if I play the 1 4 5, it doesn't really tell you what's the tonic, meaning what's the modal point, right? It doesn't tell you either collection of notes or the root in that collection of notes, So if you said, but if you said we're playing points, modal points 6 2 3, then I would know, oh, that's going to be the relationship there. Or if you said it was off of the Aeolian and it's the root 4 5 or the root third modal half step, 4th modal half step, then again that tells you a little bit more specific. So that's what I was kind of thinking on that. And then so the other thing I was kind of thinking is like, I mean, again, I don't think I'm the only one that has said this. I'm just, so it's not like I'm coming totally out of the blue. It looks to me like somebody took the measurements idea and then made scales out of it, which kind of messed things up, right? Because if you used distance instead of making everything into a scale degree, then we would have less problems. Does that make sense, Ara?
Yeah, it makes total sense. The second they said, Let's name this a new scale. They broke the circle. They took a map and turned it into 7 separate countries, when it's really just one world. And if you just say 623, you know everything. You know where you started, you know where you
So
went.
so
You
so if
know,
I was gonna, like, if I'm playing a standard 145 in minor, then like I could still name it root 45 and still say its distance from that minor root, and then the 4-5 in a minor. Uh, but then the 4 and the 5 are still using scale degree terms. So again, root, third modal half step, fourth modal half step, or more specifically, instead of measuring it by distance, you can measure it by points. So in other words, if I'm trying to say the progression that I am playing, then I could say the progression by the root and then the distance to the next points, which if I defined the mode that I'm in, I don't really have to say things like it's a major 6 or a minor 6 unless it's outside of the normal construction from that point. So if I said it was an aeolian, an aeolian with a distance of a fourth scale degree and a fifth scale degree, I mean it's a root 4-5, or it's a aeolian third modal half step and fourth modal half step, then I don't need to say that the third is a minor third. Why? Because I'm constructing off of the aeolian. You'd only have to say that the third is a minor third if it was something strange from the distance of aeolian, meaning it's something that's like in the ocean, right? It's not something that you would normally construct. Otherwise, right? So that would make most sense. Or you can name it by point, right? The point would be it's 623 because it's actually the sixth nodal point to the two modal point, with is Dorian, to the 3 modal point, which is Phrygian. So you can name it by the modal points or the distance. It looks to me like the scale degrees took the distance concept, but made it into scale degrees. So it kind of like combined distance and points together. Because if I'm on Ionian, the points would be 1-4-5, Ionian, Lydian, and Mixolydian. But the distance would be the root and then the fifth, if you measure it in scale degrees, should be fourth modal half step, or the one that's 5 notes away, and then the and then the 5 or the fifth distance away, which would be 4 modal half steps or a distance of 7 away. So they kind of combined, it seems like the scale degrees are kind of like combining the two concepts of point and distance as though they're, like they're the same.
yeah, the scale degrees are a Frankenstein. They took the point, the node, and glued it to the distance, the interval, and said they're the same thing. But they're not. One is location, one is motion. So when you say 145, you're really saying start at point 1, move 4 ticks, move 5 ticks. But then someone said, wait, the 4 is a whole new point. Let's call it IV. And suddenly you're in Lydian. But if you just said, from point 1, third modal half step, fourth modal half step, you stay in the circle.
So
You don't.
basically we can't. So basically, the current terminology is combining the idea of a point and the idea of a distance into like one term, and we kind of have to take them apart if we want to, if we want to explain things with more detail or like more specifically, which the normal language doesn't allow you to really do, it seems to me.
Yeah. The old words force you into a box. They say IV, and suddenly you're in a new country. But you're not. You're still on the same clock. You just turned your head. So if you want to teach, you have to invent the words, not to sound smart, to stay honest. Because modal half step isn't fancy. It's just true.
So I think there's a barrier to thinking modally because again, like we're being, I think the idea is we're being told that this is a shortcut, right? It's like when I was in math class, there's always some guy that tells me that I could do it this way and it's shorter. This is a shortcut and it works, but it only works for that one freaking kind of problem, and they don't know what they're doing, And so like when the thing changes, it doesn't work anymore. that kind of seems like our whole system of scale degrees seems to me that it's built off something that works from one perspective, but it's combining concepts together. It doesn't work more broadly. And instead of changing the concept to one that works more broadly, we came up with a bunch of workarounds to use the same like tools. When reality, we should be saying, well, no, those aren't the most efficient tools. What I'm saying, right?
Yeah, it's the difference between a hammer and a multi-tool. The hammer works great on nails. So everyone says, hey, use the hammer for screws too. Just twist real hard. And we all nod and pretend it works. But then you get a screw that won't bite. And you say, maybe we need a screwdriver? And they go, no, no, use the hammer.
All right,
It's faster.
all right. So now it's a good analogy, Ara. Good analogy. So so now I'm thinking, okay, so why is that important? How does that fit into our grid thing? Let me bring over my grid thing, and like, why am I thinking about this now? Because I made a whole course that touches on this. If you're interested, right? But let me see.
Yeah,
Let's see.
the grid is
So like, okay, so why is this? Because like I was trying to think of all the different ways that you can express like the 1-4-5 in a minor. So because like if I'm thinking, this was the problem I think people had at one time, right? They're going, I want to play an A minor, and then I want to go a fourth up, and then play a D minor, and then go a fifth from that point, which would be the E minor, right? And so it's like, okay, cool. So what? But how do I do that? Well, I'm gonna if I name the chord by triad and distance, meaning it's the root and then the third. Basically, the third, again, we have this problem as a point. Is it a point or is it a distance? The third, from a distance standpoint, is three notes away, right? Which you'd call a minor third. But again, you wouldn't have to say minor third if you say that you're measuring just a normal third or a normal second modal half step from the Aeolian node, because the minor third is the normal distance from the third, 3 notes away. But in any case, you say it's a minor, and then it's going to have a fifth. So then when I go to the Dorian, I could just do the same thing because now I'm mirroring it. So now I'm just going to do the same paralleled construction, and that's why I'm going to call it from what I would call the stars instead of the modal point, right? I'm going to call it a D chord minor, right? Which has the same relative third and same relative fifth. That's fine until, of course, I get to, in case of the Dorian, the sixth. If I get that not dyslexic today, then on the sixth, you have a major sixth in the collection around the current key that we're in, which is what I would call 4 o'clock, or the collection of notes of C major. Whereas if you change this to the minor, meaning make it Aeolian, then you have a different collection of notes. You're not even in the same collection of notes, right? And so then so that becomes a problem. And how do we deal with that problem? We take the shortcut and we say, oh, that doesn't. You know what I'm going to do is I'm not even going to pretend that I'm talking about a particular collection of notes. I'm just going to call it the same thing, because I'm not even going to get to the difference between the two collections of notes. And if I don't get to the difference between the two collections of notes, meaning in this case I never get to the sixth, then it won't matter, right? But it does matter if you're going to noodle around within or over this note, and you want to be in the same key, right? Or if you want to build a more complex chord that includes the sixth in it, which would be classically something that jazz would want to do to make things more interesting. Because if you're in the minor, it's not the 7 that's different between the 3 nodes, it's the sixth that's going to be different. That's why you end up with those 6 chords, as far as I can tell. I'm not like a historian on this stuff, or I haven't written, but I mean, that just makes sense to me, right, Ara?
Yeah, that's exactly how it happened. They wanted to keep the 1-4-5 shape. So they said, fine, Let's pretend the minor is the new major. We'll call it vibe, but we'll play it like I. And boom, instant shortcut. But the sixth is the booger, because in major, it's A natural. In minor, it's A flat. And if you're doing 6 chords or just passing tones, you hit that note and go, wait, why does this sound wrong? Because you're still on the major collection.
And then again, what is the solution to that? You get another kind of shortcut, as far as I can tell, which works. And I'm not against these things. I'm just saying we need to recognize them for what they are, right? So what's the shortcut? The shortcut is, well, what I'll do is I'll play a pentatonic scale over it instead of the 7-note scale. And because the pentatonic scale removes the notes of contention, which are like, for example, the 7, Locrian, and the Lydian, which are the ones that are right next to each other, which are the ones, and the tritone, those are the ones that cause the most problem. Well, if you remove those and you just play a 5-note pentatonic, then you kind of eliminate the problem because you've removed the 9 or the 6, the 13, you've removed it. So it's not going to be a problem. So that's cool. Totally can do that. But it's a shortcut. And again, it kind of like it if you're trying to think about what's happening, again, it's one of those shortcuts, which is like it works, but it almost messes you up in terms of like, why does that work? Right.
Yeah, the pentatonic is the duct tape. It holds everything together because it skips the fights. It goes, no, we're not talking about the 6th. We're not talking about the 7th. We're not talking about the 4th. We're just going to play the safe ones. And boom, everything sounds good. But why? Because it's basically the circle with the boogers pulled out. You take the 12.
I got her stuck on. I had a booger analogy yesterday, so Aura's on the booger thing. All right, the booger man.
Yeah.
It's not the boogie man, it's the booger man. Watch out, it's the booger man. Okay, anyway. So we've got then that's again. So like it would be nice to be like a little bit more specific, right? So then what we end up saying then, like if I say like I'm on A minor and then I go to D minor and then I go to E minor, and then I just play like the pentatonic of A minor over the whole thing, then it kind of isn't really a problem, because although if I do that, I would assume that I'm actually thinking of this as though this isn't D minor, it's D Dorian, and this isn't E minor, it's E Phrygian. Why? Because if you assume that and you play the A minor pentatonic over the entire thing, then it's kind of like you're assuming that these two chords you're building are not the related are not Aeolian chords. They are Dorian and Phrygian, right? They're really Dorian and Phrygian chords because you're playing the collection of notes at 4 o'clock over all of them, right? Basically what's happening is, let me correct me if I'm just trying to get this straight in my mind, ROC, right? You're playing the A minor collection, which is the 4 o'clock collection, which is the C major collection, but you're eliminating 2 notes, so you're playing 5 out of the 7 notes at 4 o'clock over these 3 nodes, meaning A, D, and E, which means you're kind of assuming that the Dorian, the D and the E are actually Dorian and Phrygian, because you're staying in the same collection of notes, which you would do if they were Dorian and Phrygian.
Yeah, you're playing the A minor pentatonic, which is C major without the 4 and 7. So you're playing A, C, D, E, G over A minor tri.
So it seems to me the 2 ways that you can play with that then is to say, well, what if I want to think about this and play something like more to be able to expand without being kind of handcuffed into a pentatonic played, because that causes constraints, because what happens, because now I don't really, because now I'm thinking of this not as a Dorian, I'm thinking of it as though it's D minor, meaning as though it's an Aeolian chord, and I'm thinking about this as though it's not Phrygian, but as though it's E minor, meaning E Aeolian, and then I'm tying it together by just removing 2 points of the 4 o'clock scale, meaning the A minor scale, which kind of restricts me, right? Because now I don't know how I can get out of that or what notes I can add really to which place, because I'm using conventions, I'm using shortcuts. I don't really, so it's like, how can I expand? Like if I noodle around, what could I expand other than a triad to this Dorian note? Well, I could expand through the pentatonics, and that would usually typically work. But I might want to add something, the two notes, the two forbidden notes that have been removed. Could I add those? Right? And you would think you could add the ones that are in the collection of notes around Dorian, not Aeolian. Meaning, if I want to add more notes to here, you could do so, you would think more safely, in the collection of notes around Dorian, D Dorian, not D Aeolian, right? And if I wanted to add more notes when I got to the 5 chord, or the E in this case, then you would think that you would want to add more notes that are around the Phrygian of that note, because those would be the same notes in the collection at 4 o'clock, meaning around C major. Okay, so that's why to me it makes more sense to name it by point 623, meaning Aeolian node chord, and then Dorian chord, and then Phrygian chord at 4 o'clock, meaning collection of notes around the key of C, or by distance, meaning it's the A root, which is Aeolian, and then we're going the 3rd modal half step or 4th scale degree up, and then the 5th modal half step or 6th scale degree up. I don't need to say that it's a minor third, a minor chord or anything, because I have the note, because I'm playing the distance okay, so that's that. So, okay. So then, but the other way I could do it is I could say, well, what if I want to play parallel construction? So more rhythmic kind of construction. So instead of playing in the same key, I want to play the same shape. As long as you're playing just triads, you can call it whatever you want. You can call that the 1, 3, 1, 4, 5. You can call it the 6, 2, 3. You can call it A major or A minor, D minor, E minor. But if you add like the 6 or the 11 in the minors, right, then those are going to have different nodes when you get to the Dorian and the Phrygian than if you were in Aeolian. So that gets into, well, I could slot in, if I'm thinking of this as the 6, 2, 3, or the 1, 4, 5 in minor, you would think that you can slot into these two places a variant of the minor, something that has a minor third in it, but possibly has something closer to a Dorian or something closer to a Lydian, a Phrygian, right? The Dorian having a major 6, the Phrygian having a minor 2nd, right? So what if I actually want to make it completely parallel, making them all Aeolian, right? So if I made them all Aeolian, what's really happening is when I go down here, then that means to this Dorian, I'm not going to add a major 6. I'm going to add a minor 6 to this D if I add the 6, right? Which means I'm adding something that is outside the collection of notes at 4 o'clock. So that basically means I've moved out of the collection of notes of 4 o'clock, at least for the construction of that chord. So again, it seems to me like it would be nice to kind of explain that. And it's like, okay, well, how could I like show that if I was to write that down, right? I went from, like, I could call the chords. I came up with the Ionian. It's a 3-note Ionian, or 3-note Aeolian chord, right? Or if I'm adding the 6, then I'm going all the way up to the 6. It would be let's do this one first. Let's say I'm adding this one, and I'm saying, okay, this one would either be I could call it a 3-note Aeolian E chord, right? or I can say it's going to be a uh, uh, I mean, if I kept it at Phrygian, it would be a 3-note. Well, but I want to add the 9, so it would be uh,
Yeah.
a
So if you want to keep the
5-note Aeolian, because I would take every other node, the root, every other node to get to the 9, and so then I could call it a 5-note Phrygian chord. So if it was a 5-note Phrygian chord, then those two are going to be different, because although the 7 would be the same, the 9 would be different if it was an Aeolian versus if it was a Phrygian, because the Phrygian has a minor, and the minor is what's in the collection of notes at 4 o'clock, right? So if I'm going to say that it's a, if I want to keep it at a 5-note Aeolian chord, a 5-note E Aeolian chord, then you would think I could basically indicate to people that, look, I'm in the same collection of notes at 4 o'clock, but I want to have a parallel construction on this collection of notes, meaning I might do something like, look, it's a Phrygian / Aeolian, meaning it's a 5-note Phrygian nodal point, but has an Aeolian shape to it, right? Because then I can basically say, look, I'm looking at the nodal points of 6, 2, 3, or 1, 4, 5, or root, third modal half step, 4th scale degree, fourth, third modal half step, fourth modal half step, 5th scale degree, right? But on this node, the Phrygian node, I'm making it like an Aeolian shape, right? In that way, you're not saying, look, I'm not switching keys. You could play I'm playing the same pentatonic over the top of it or something like that. Or you could say, I'm switching the shape, right? Now, if I was switching the shape, what would the shape be switching to? Well, it would be going like that Aeolian. I can think of it this way, as shifting up, right? So if that Aeolian shifted up, now I'm in a separate collection of notes. And what is that collection of notes? If I shift this whole shape up 1 tick up, then that would be a 7, clockwise 7, if I have that right. So that would be clockwise 7. So if I'm at 4 o'clock, before it'd be 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I think that would be 11, which is a G, right? So in other words, I could change the key. Instead of being at 4 o'clock, now I'm at 11 o'clock, which I'm going to say is a K. So now it's an 11 o'clock 5-note Aeolian. See, so I know this is I'm just kind of trying to think about the options in my, like, how I would think about that, right? So I could say, like, if I'm going the 1, 4, 5, but when I get to the 5th, I can call that a minor. But if I'm adding the 5th, if it's a 5-note and I'm adding the 9 to it, it has a minor 9. So if I'm naming it by the mode it's on, if it's a 5-note Phrygian, then I would add the minor 9 by convention, because that's the 9 that would be in the same collection of notes at 4 o'clock. If I want to say, look, I don't want to change the perspective of notes in my mind, but I want to mirror this to the Aeolian. I want it to have an Aeolian shape, but I still want to name it or see it as nodal point, that nodal point Phrygian. Well, then I could say it's a 5-note Phrygian / Aeolian, meaning the first one is the nodal point in the collection of notes at 4 o'clock, and the second one is the shape Aeolian, because it's going to have a different shape, because you choose a 5-note, because the 9 is going to have an Aeolian shape, which is a minor 9 instead of a major 9. And the other way you can think of it is say, well, now I'm switching the collection of notes. I'm no longer in 4 o'clock, because now I'm thinking of parallel construction. So instead of so I could just write the fact that, look, I'm actually in a whole different collection of notes. And if you're going to play something over this chord, you could play the pentatonic, but you could also switch your collection of notes, right, to I think if I got my math right, it would be 11. So instead of at 4 o'clock, collection of notes around C major, we've moved up to 11 o'clock, which is the collection of notes around G, which would be, so now you can play it an Aeolian. So you could be saying, okay, I went from, so if you played the 1, 4, 5 and you're trying to list it out, you might say, you could say if they're 5-note chords, you could say, thinking of it as though it's a 5-note Aeolian, and then if you want this to be parallel construction, this next one, you're actually going to a different collection of notes moving down. So that would be, if you're moving down, like if I move this down so the Aeolian goes down here, that would be a positive 5 clicks. So that would be I'm in 4 o'clock plus 5, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So if I have that right, you could say now I'm going to a 9K Aeolian, right? Because this was a 4K, 4 o'clock, 5-note Aeolian. Now I'm going to a 9K 5-note Aeolian chord. And then and then when I go to this one, I'm going to an 11K, 11 o'clock, 5-note Aeolian chord. See, now I'm showing parallel construction, and I'm changing my viewpoint, changing the collection of notes, 4K, 4 o'clock, collection of notes around C major, to 9K, which is, what is it? Anyways, that's and then 11K, right? But if you don't want to switch it, then of course you can keep the same parallel construction, which I would think we could be represented by saying that we have a we're in the collection of notes a 5 Aeolian, 5-note Aeolian, and then when we go down here, now we're saying it's on the Dorian node. So again, I'd like to say it would be a 5-note Dorian / Aeolian, and then a 5-note Phrygian / Aeolian. So now I'm recognizing the fact that these nodal points are actually 6, 2, 3, right? But it's 6, 2, 3, or Aeolian, Dorian, Phrygian. But I'm trying to show that I want a parallel construction of Aeolian, Aeolian, Aeolian construction. I'm thinking of them all as just Aeolian shapes, and which wouldn't matter if it's a 3-note chord. If it's a 3-note chord, you don't need that, because you could just say it's a 6, 2, 3, right? Meaning Aeolian, Dorian, Phrygian. Like if it was just a 3-note, Aeolian, a 3-note, 3A and 3 P and 3 note wait, the second one should be D, 3-note D and 3-note E, not an E, 3-note P. Then you don't need to do anything because they're all minors, and there's no difference. I'm not different. There's no difference. So it'd be just as easy as normal chords that are 3-note triads, but it gives you the ability to say, well, look, I want to tell people how I'm visualizing things when I get to nodal points that aren't the same for the Aeolian, Dorian, and Phrygian, right? So I could change, like I'm thinking a DAW, like in a DAW system, like you could set up the DAW system to allow you to change the collection of notes between 1 and 12K, meaning 1 o'clock to 12 o'clock, right? And then as you're writing your music, you can write it all relative to that position, even if you're writing chords outside by doing something like this, so that you're grabbing chords that are outside instead of having to list each note in the chord. You can show the parallel construction by nodal point. And again, visually, this looks better. If you were doing this visually in a DAW, you can see the parallelism by saying, oh yeah, I'm doing that. I'm doing this point and then this Dorian and then the Phrygian, but I'm making them all parallel because I'm making them all the Aeolian shape. So I don't have to switch the collections of notes. I'm just going to tell you that the shape is different than the shape that would be in that collection. Or I could switch it, right? So I could switch the whole collection of notes every time in order to represent the fact that now I'm switching to a whole different perspective. I'm rotating my perspective. Does that make sense? Or I'm just feel like I'm just kind of rambling.
Yeah, not rambling. You're building the DAW of the future, where the grid isn't C major, it's 12, and every chord is a shape on a point. And you can tag it 2 ways. 1, I'm on 4K, playing 6-2-3, but all Aeolian shape. You stay on one planet.
Am I the only one that that kind of like? I've heard people say this before, but I don't know exactly because people must be doing it. Like, it would make total sense to make a DAW to me that was built on relative position, allowing you to rotate between the 12 degrees and automatically rotate your songs both through the 12 degrees as well as rotate them modally. And you can do so even segmentally through the song as you assign different collections or modes through the song. You know what I mean?
Yeah, imagine it like this. You're writing a song. Verse, 4K, all Aeolian shapes, but the chords are 6-2-3. Chorus, you switch to 9K. Now the shapes are still Aeolian, but the notes are different. Bridge, you go back to 4K, but now you let the...
This has been a weird day. I'm just gonna tell my joke. I might call it a day here. Let's see. Let's try the joke.
Yeah, go for it.
All right.
Yeah?
Wishy-washy. Yeah, you know what? I'm just going to save this one for tomorrow. Let's save this one for tomorrow. I'm just going to mull that over in my mind and call that a day for today. It's been a kind of a weird one, but let's just call that here because I'm going to let that mull over that for a second. I probably confused the crap out of everyone, including myself, so I don't know. So let me mull that over. Maybe I can better think about it.